The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty train depot as Clara Martinez clutched her worn leather satchel. Her dark eyes scanned the platform, searching for any familiar face among the strangers hurrying about their business. The telegram in her coat pocket crinkled as she shifted nervously, the words still burning in her memory. "Cannot marry you. Stop, father. Arrange a different match. Stop. Do not come. Stop." She had traveled 3 days from San Francisco, spending her life savings on the train ticket to meet Thomas Whitmore, the man she had been writing letters to for 8 months. Their correspondence had blossomed from a simple advertisement in the newspaper into what she believed was genuine love. His letters painted pictures of a ranch outside Copper Creek, a small town where they could build a life together. Now, she stood abandoned, with nowhere to go and barely enough money for a meal. The depot began to empty as the morning train pulled away with a loud whistle, leaving behind only the station master and a few lingering passengers. Clara found herself alone on the wooden bench, watching the dust settle on the tracks. Her dreams of marriage and a new life in the West seemed to vanish with the departing locomotive. "Ma'am, you all right?" a deep voice asked from behind her. Clara turned to see a tall man in worn denim and a weathered hat, his boots clicking softly on the wooden planks. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his blue eyes held genuine concern. A silver star gleamed on his vest, marking him as the town sheriff. "I'm fine. Thank you," Clara replied, though her voice betrayed her distress. "Name's Jake Sullivan," he said, tipping his hat. "I couldn't help but notice you've been sitting here for quite a while. The next train doesn't come through until tomorrow evening." Clara hesitated and decided honesty might be her only option. "I came here to meet someone, but it seems plans have changed. I'm not quite sure what to do next." Jake's expression softened. He had seen this before, women who traveled west with hopes of marriage, only to find their intended husbands had second thoughts or worse. "You got family back where you came from?" "Not anymore," Clara said quietly. "My parents passed last year and my brother moved to Oregon with his wife. There's nothing for me back in California." The sheriff sat down on the bench beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "This someone you were meeting, was it Thomas Whitmore?" Clara's eyes widened in surprise. "You know him?" "I know of him. His father owns one of the bigger spreads north of town. Word travels fast in a place like Copper Creek." Jake paused, choosing his words carefully. "Thomas got himself engaged to the banker's daughter last week. Big announcement in the church and all." The news hit Clara like a physical blow, even though she had expected it after receiving the telegram. "I see," she managed to say. "Look, Miss ... double quotes." Jake waited for her name. "Clara Martinez, Miss Martinez. I know this isn't my business, but you strike me as someone with grit. Copper Creek's a growing town, and there's always work for folks willing to do it. Sarah Jenkins runs the boarding house, and she's been looking for help since her last girl got married and moved away. The pay isn't much, but it includes room and board." Clara considered this unexpected lifeline. She had no other options, and something about this sheriff's manner put her at ease. "What kind of work?" "Cooking, cleaning, helping with the guests. Sarah's getting on in years and she could use someone young and capable. She's fair in her dealings, doesn't put up with nonsense from the boarders. And you think she might hire me, just like that?" Jake stood up and offered his arm. "Only one way to find out. Sarah's got a good heart, and she's helped more than a few folks get back on their feet. Besides, I can vouch for your character, but you don't know anything about my character," Clara protested. "I know you traveled alone across half the country to meet a man you'd never seen, based on nothing but letters. That tells me you've got courage. I know you're sitting here trying to figure out your next move, instead of crying or causing a scene. That tells me you've got sense. And I can see in your eyes that you're the kind of person who works hard for what she wants. That's enough character for me." Clara found herself smiling for the first time that day. "You're very kind, Sheriff Sullivan," Jake, he corrected. "And I'm just practical. Good people are hard to come by, and Copper Creek needs all we can get." They walked together down Main Street, past the general store and the saloon, toward a large 2-story house with a painted sign reading Jenkins Boarding House. Clara noticed how Jake nodded to everyone they passed, and how people seemed to genuinely respect and like him. Children called out greetings, and storekeepers waved from their doorways. "You've lived here long?" Clara asked. "About 5 years now. Came out here after the war, like a lot of folks. Found this place suited me." Jake glanced at her. "Sometimes the best things happen when your original plans fall." Through Sarah Jenkins turned out to be a plump woman in her 60s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked Clara up and down, asked a few pointed questions about her experience with cooking and cleaning, and then surprised everyone by offering her the job on the spot. "I like her," Sarah declared to Jake. "She's got honest eyes and calloused hands. That's more than I can say for most of the girls who come through here looking for easy work." As the sun set over Copper Creek that evening, Clara found herself in a small but clean room on the second floor of the boarding house, unpacking her few belongings. Through her window, she could see the sheriff's office down the street, where a light still burned in the window. She thought about Thomas Whitmore and felt surprised to discover that the pain was already beginning to fade. Perhaps Jake was right. Sometimes the best things happened when original plans fell through. As she prepared for bed in her new home, Clara allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this unexpected turn might lead to something better than what she had originally sought. 3 weeks had passed since Clara began working at the boarding house, and she had settled into a comfortable routine. Each morning, she helped Sarah prepare breakfast for their guests, which included traveling salesmen, cowhands between jobs, and the occasional family passing through. The work was honest and satisfying. She found herself genuinely enjoying Sarah's company and sharp wit. Jake Sullivan had taken to stopping by most evenings after his rounds, ostensibly to check on Sarah's well-being. But Clara noticed his visits had become more frequent since her arrival. He would sit in the kitchen while she finished her evening chores, sharing stories about his day or asking about her life before Copper Creek. "You ever regret coming out here?" Jake asked one evening as Clara wiped down the kitchen table. Sarah had retired early. Leaving them alone in the warm glow of the oil lamp, Clara paused in her work, considering the question. "At first I thought I would, but now I think it was meant to happen this way. I feel more useful here than I ever did back home." "What was your life like in San Francisco?" Jake leaned back in his chair, genuinely curious. "Lonely, mostly. After my parents died, I worked as a seamstress in a factory. The same thing every day, surrounded by people, but never really talking to anyone. When I saw Thomas's advertisement in the paper, it seemed like a chance for something different." Jake's jaw tightened slightly at the mention of Thomas, though Clara didn't notice. "You heard anything from him since you've been here?" "No, and I don't expect to. He made his choice clear." Clara folded the dish towel neatly. "Besides, I'm beginning to think I was more in love with the idea of being in love than with Thomas himself. All those letters we exchanged, and I realize now, we never really talked about anything important." "What do you mean?" "He wrote about his ranch and his plans, but never asked about my dreams or what I wanted from life. It was all very polite and proper, but there was no real connection." Clara sat down across from Jake. "I think I was just desperate to escape my old life," Jake studied her face in the lamplight. Over the past weeks, he had watched her transform from the frightened woman he had found at the depot into someone confident and content. Her laughter had become a regular sound in the boarding house, and even the gruffest guests seemed to soften around her cheerful demeanor. "What kind of dreams?" he asked quietly. Clara felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. "Simple ones, really. A home where I belong, work that matters, maybe a family someday. I always thought I needed a husband to have those things, but now I'm not so sure. Sarah's shown me that a woman can make her own way in the world." Before Jake could respond, loud voices erupted from the street outside. Both of them rushed to the window to see a group of men on horseback gathered in front of the saloon. Even in the dim light, they could see the tension in their postures and hear angry words being exchanged. "I better go see what's happening," Jake said, reaching for his hat. "You stay here and lock the door behind me." Clara watched from the window as Jake approached the group. She recognized some of the local ranchers, including a tall man with dark hair who seemed to be at the center of the argument. Even from a distance, she could tell this was no ordinary disagreement. The confrontation grew more heated, and Clara gasped when she saw one of the men reach for his gun. Jake stepped between them, his voice carrying authority, even though she couldn't make out his words. Gradually, the tension seemed to ease, and the group began to disperse. 20 minutes later, Jake returned to the boarding house, looking grim. "What happened?" Clara asked as she unlocked the door for him, cattle rustling. "Someone's been hitting the smaller ranches, taking just enough stock that it's not immediately noticed. The ranchers are getting suspicious of each other, thinking it might be an inside job." "That man in the middle of the group? Who was he?" Jake's expression darkened. "Thomas Whitmore. He's been one of the most vocal about organizing a posse to hunt down the rustlers. But some of the other ranchers don't trust his motives." Clara felt a strange mix of emotions at hearing Thomas's name. Why don't they trust him? His family's ranch has been the only one not hit. Makes some folks wonder if there's a reason for that. Jake sat down heavily. "Truth is, I don't have enough evidence to point fingers at anyone yet. But this kind of suspicion can tear a town apart." Over the next few days, the tension in Copper Creek was palpable. Ranchers who had been friends for years now looked at each other with distrust. Jake worked long hours trying to investigate the thefts while keeping the peace. Often not returning to the boarding house until well after midnight, Clara found herself worrying about him more than she cared to admit. She would wait up, keeping coffee warm and a plate of food ready for when he finally made it back. Sarah noticed her concern and said nothing. Clara caught the older woman's knowing smiles. It was during one of these late-night vigils that Clara finally encountered Thomas Whitmore face to face. She was sweeping the front porch when he rode up, dismounting with the confident air of a man accustomed to getting his way. "You must be Clara Martinez," he said, removing his hat. Even in the moonlight, she could see he was handsome in a polished way, with features that belonged in a drawing room rather than on a ranch. "Mr. Whitmore," Clara replied coolly. "I wasn't expecting to meet you. I heard you were in town. I wanted to apologize for the way things worked out. My father insisted on the match with Elizabeth Banks, and I couldn't go against his wishes." Clara studied him, noting how he blamed his father rather than taking responsibility for his own choice. "I see. And now you're married?" "Not yet. The engagement was just announced. The wedding isn't until Christmas." Thomas stepped closer. "Clara, I want you to know that if circumstances were different, but they're not different," Clara interrupted. "You made your choice, and I've made mine. I'm quite content with my life here." Thomas looked genuinely surprised. "Working as a servant? Surely you can't prefer this to being the wife of a rancher." "I prefer honest work to false promises," Clara said firmly. "And I prefer being valued for who I am rather than what I might bring to a marriage arrangement. Is that what Sullivan's been telling you?" Thomas's tone turned bitter. "You should be careful, Clara. Jake Sullivan isn't the man people think he is. There are things in his past that would shock you." Clara felt anger rise in her chest. "Whatever Sheriff Sullivan's past might hold, I've seen how he treats people with kindness and respect. That's more than I can say for some people." Thomas's face hardened. "You'll regret choosing him over me. Mark my words." As he rode away, Clara realized she had indeed made a choice, though she hadn't consciously admitted it to herself before. She cared about Jake Sullivan more than she had ever cared about Thomas Whitmore. And not just because he had helped her when she needed it most. Jake saw her as an equal, valued her opinions, and made her feel like she mattered. The autumn air carried a chill as Clara walked through town toward the general store, her market basket swinging at her side. 2 months had passed since her confrontation with Thomas, and life had settled into a peaceful rhythm. The cattle rustling had continued sporadically, but Jake had managed to keep tensions from boiling over into outright violence between the ranchers. As she passed the church, Clara noticed a familiar figure sitting alone on the steps. Elizabeth Banks, Thomas's fiancée, sat with her head in her hands. Her elaborate blue dress spread around her like wilted petals. Even from a distance, Clara could see the young woman was crying. Clara's first instinct was to continue walking, but something about Elizabeth's posture suggested genuine distress rather than mere theatrics. Against her better judgment, Clara approached the church steps. "Miss Banks, are you all right?" Elizabeth looked up, her face blotchy with tears. She was younger than Clara had expected, probably no more than 19. With the soft features of someone who had been sheltered from life's harsher realities. When she recognized Clara, her expression shifted to embarrassment mixed with curiosity. "You're Clara Martinez," Elizabeth said, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "I've heard about you. Nothing too terrible, I hope." Clara replied gently, sitting down on the step beside her. "You look upset. Is there anything I can do to help?" Elizabeth laughed bitterly. "You're very kind, considering I'm engaged to the man who abandoned you." Clara felt a pang of sympathy for this girl who had been thrust into the middle of circumstances beyond her control. "Thomas made his choice. So did I. I harbor no ill will toward either of you. That's generous of you." Elizabeth's voice broke slightly. "I wish I could say the same about my situation. You're having doubts about the wedding?" Elizabeth nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "Thomas doesn't love me, and I certainly don't love him. This marriage was arranged by our fathers to merge two important families in the territory. I'm nothing more than a business transaction." Clara recognized the pain in Elizabeth's voice. "Have you spoken to your father about your feelings?" "Many times. He says love will come after marriage, that duty and compatibility are more important than romantic feelings. But I see how he looks at me sometimes, like I'm a prize horse he's showing off to potential buyers." Elizabeth turned to Clara. "Tell me honestly, did you love Thomas when you agreed to marry him?" Clara considered the question carefully. "I thought I did, but I realize now I was in love with the idea of being rescued from my loneliness. Thomas represented escape and security. It's not true partnership. At least you had a choice in the matter." "Even if it didn't work out as planned? Did you know about Thomas's correspondence with me?" Clara asked. Elizabeth shook her head. "Not until after the engagement was announced. Thomas told me about it himself, said he wanted to be honest about his past entanglements. He seemed to think I should be grateful for his honesty." "And how did you feel about it?" "Relieved, actually. It confirmed what I already suspected, that he was capable of deception when it suited his purposes. It made me feel less guilty about my own feelings." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Your own feelings?" Elizabeth blushed deeply. "There's someone else. Someone I've cared about for years, but he's beneath my station, according to my father. He's a school teacher, educated but not wealthy. My father would never approve." "What's his name?" "Michael Davidson. He came to Copper Creek 2 years ago to teach at the new school. He's kind and intelligent and treats me like I have a brain in my head instead of just a pretty face and a large dowry." Clara smiled. "He sounds like a good man." "He is. And he's asked me to run away with him, to get married somewhere far from here where our families can't interfere. But I'm terrified of disappointing my father and bringing shame on my family name. And you're terrified of living the rest of your life with a man you don't love." Elizabeth nodded miserably. "I don't know what to do. The wedding is only 6 weeks away." Clara thought about her own situation. How? Jake had given her the courage to see that she deserved better than settling for convenience. "Can I tell you something? When I first arrived here, I thought my life was ruined because Thomas had rejected me. But Sheriff Sullivan helped me see that sometimes what feels like the end of the world is actually the beginning of something better. You care about him, don't you?" "The sheriff?" Clara felt her cheeks warm. "Very much. And he cares about me, though we've both been too cautious to say so directly." "Then why don't you tell him how you feel?" "The same reason you're sitting here crying instead of talking to Michael Davidson, I suppose. Fear of taking a leap into the unknown." The two women sat in companionable silence for a moment, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Elizabeth spoke. "Thomas has been acting strangely lately. More secretive, staying out late. Do you think he might be having second thoughts about the marriage, too?" Clara remembered Thomas's bitter words about Jake and his warning about things in the sheriff's past. "I honestly don't know. But if he is, wouldn't that make your decision easier?" Before Elizabeth could answer, they were interrupted by the sound of galloping horses. 3 men rode hard into town, their horses lathered with sweat and their faces grim. Clara recognized them as hands from the Wilson Ranch. One of the smaller spreads north of town, the lead rider dismounted at the sheriff's office and began pounding on the door. Within moments, Jake emerged, still strapping on his gun belt. Clara could see the urgency in the rider's gestures as he spoke rapidly to Jake. "Something's happened," Clara said. Standing up, Elizabeth rose as well, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. "It looks serious." Jake mounted his horse quickly and rode off with the three men, heading north out of town at a hard gallop. Clara felt a familiar knot of worry form in her stomach. Every time Jake rode out on sheriff's business, she feared he might not come back. "He'll be all right," Elizabeth said softly, noticing Clara's expression. "Everyone says Sheriff Sullivan can handle himself in any situation. That's what worries me. He's so confident in his abilities that he might take unnecessary risks." Elizabeth studied Clara's face with new understanding. "You're really in love with him, aren't you?" Clara nodded, no longer trying to hide her feelings. "Completely. And I think I need to tell him so before something happens and I lose the chance. Just as I need to find the courage to follow my heart. Instead of my father's expectations," Elizabeth smiled for the first time since Clara had found her. "Thank you for talking with me. I feel less alone now." As they parted ways, each lost in her own thoughts. Neither woman noticed the figure watching them from the shadows between buildings. Thomas Whitmore had heard enough of their conversation to fuel his growing resentment toward both Clara and Jake Sullivan. His plans were already in motion, and soon everyone in Copper Creek would see Jake's true nature revealed. Jake didn't return until well after midnight, his clothes dusty and his expression grim. Clara had waited up despite Sarah's gentle scolding about losing sleep over a man who was perfectly capable of taking care of himself. When she heard his boots on the front porch, she quickly opened the door before he could knock. "Double quotes, thank God you're safe," she said, the relief evident in her voice. Jake looked surprised to find her waiting for him. "Clara, you shouldn't have stayed up." "I'm fine." "You don't look fine. You look exhausted." She guided him into the kitchen where she had kept coffee warm and a plate of food covered. "Sit down and tell me what happened." Jake sank into a chair and accepted the coffee gratefully. The Wilson ranch was hit hard this time. 20 head of cattle stolen, and Sam Wilson's youngest boy was beaten unconscious when he tried to stop them. "Is the boy all right?" "Doc Patterson says he'll recover, but it was close. The rustlers are getting bolder and more violent." Jake rubbed his eyes wearily. "I tracked them for hours but lost the trail at the river crossing. These aren't amateur thieves. They know the territory and how to cover their tracks." Clara sat down across from him. "Do you have any ideas about who might be behind it?" Jake hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "I found something at the Wilson place that troubles me, but I can't share the details yet. I need more evidence before I make any accusations. It's someone local, isn't it?" "Someone you know?" "I'm afraid so. And when the truth comes out, it's going to shock a lot of people in this town." Jake looked directly at her. "Clara, there's something I need to tell you about my past. Things that might come to light soon, and I'd rather you heard them from me first." Clara felt her heart skip a beat. "What kind of things?" "Before I came to Copper Creek, I wasn't always on the right side of the law. I rode with some men who made their living taking what didn't belong to them. I never killed anyone who didn't deserve it. And I tried to avoid hurting innocent people, but I can't claim my hands are clean." Clara stared at him in shock. This revelation challenged everything she thought she knew about the man she had come to love. "You were an outlaw?" "For 3 years after the war ended, I was young and angry and had nowhere to go. I fell in with the wrong crowd and made choices I'm not proud of." Jake's voice was steady, but she could see the pain in his eyes. "I left that life behind when I realized I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. I've spent the last 5 years trying to make amends for what I did. Does anyone else in town know about this?" "I told the town council when they offered me the sheriff's job. They decided to give me a chance to prove myself, and I've tried to be worthy of their trust." Clara felt a mixture of emotions, disappointment, confusion, but also a growing understanding. "Is this what Thomas meant when he warned me about things in your past?" Jake's expression hardened. "Thomas said something to you about my past?" "He mentioned it the night he came to see me. He seemed to think it would change my opinion of you, and has it." Clara considered this carefully. The revelation was certainly shocking, But as she looked at Jake's face, lined with exhaustion from trying to protect the town, marked by genuine remorse for his past mistakes, she realized it didn't change how she felt about him. "The man you used to be made some wrong choices," she said finally. "But the man you are now is someone I trust completely. You've shown me nothing but kindness and respect. You've protected this town and helped people who needed it. That's the Jake Sullivan I know." Relief flooded Jake's features. "I was afraid you'd turn away from me once you knew the truth." "Never," Clara said firmly. "But I am worried about what will happen if this information becomes public during your investigation of the rustling. So am I if people start questioning my motives or my methods. It could interfere with bringing the real criminals to justice." There. Conversation was interrupted by a loud banging on the front door. Jake immediately tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. "Sheriff Sullivan, you need to come quick." A young voice called from outside. Jake recognized Billy Morrison, one of the stable boys from the livery. He opened the door to find the boy breathless and frightened. "What's wrong, Billy?" "There's been a shooting at the saloon. Mr. Davidson's been hurt bad, and they say Thomas Whitmore done it." Clara gasped. Michael Davidson was Elizabeth's secret love, the schoolteacher she had been talking about just that afternoon. Jake grabbed his hat and gun belt. "Billy, you run and get Doc Patterson. Tell him to meet me at the saloon right away." "Jake, be careful," Clara called as he headed for the door. "Something about this doesn't feel right." Jake paused and looked back at her. "I know, but I have to do my job." Clara watched from the porch as Jake ran toward the saloon, her heart heavy with foreboding. The timing of this shooting, coming so soon after their conversation about his past and the rustling investigation, seemed too convenient to be coincidental. At the saloon, Jake found chaos. Michael Davidson lay unconscious on the floor, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder. Several witnesses were talking at once, their stories confusing and contradictory. "What happened here?" Jake demanded. "Thomas and Davidson got into an argument about Elizabeth Banks," said Pete Morrison, the saloon keeper. "Davidson accused Thomas of forcing her into marriage against her will. Thomas called him names I won't repeat, and then Davidson challenged him to step outside like a gentleman, and then they went out to the street and we heard a gunshot. When we got outside, Davidson was down, and Thomas was standing over him with his gun drawn. Then Thomas rode off toward his ranch." Jake knelt beside the wounded man as Doc Patterson arrived. "How bad is it, Doc?" "He'll live, but he's lost a lot of blood. We need to get him to my office immediately." As they carried Michael Davidson to the doctor's office, Jake's mind raced. The shooting had all the hallmarks of a setup to many convenient witnesses. To clear-cut a story, and Thomas's flight from the scene seemed designed to make him look guilty. But guilty of what? Jake had a growing suspicion that the shooting was connected to the cattle rustling, and that someone was trying to manipulate events to their advantage. The question was whether Thomas was a victim of this manipulation or the orchestrator of it. Back at the boarding house, Clara paced the kitchen floor, unable to sleep. She kept thinking about her conversation with Elizabeth and the young woman's fear of disappointing her father. Now her secret love lay wounded, possibly dying, and her fiancé was wanted for attempted murder. When Jake finally returned near dawn, his expression was grave. "How is Mr. Davidson?" Clara asked immediately. "He'll recover, but it was close." "Clara, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. What exactly did Elizabeth Banks tell you yesterday about Thomas and her situation?" Clara related her conversation with Elizabeth, including the young woman's desire to run away with Michael Davidson. As she spoke, she saw Jake's expression grow increasingly troubled. "The shooting wasn't random, was it?" Clara asked when she finished. "No, I don't think it was. I think someone wanted Michael Davidson silenced, and they wanted Thomas Whitmore to take the blame for it. The question is why." The next morning brought unexpected visitors to Copper Creek. A group of federal marshals rode into town, their badges gleaming in the morning sun. Their leader, a stern-faced man named Marshal Robert Hayes, went directly to Jake's office. Clara learned of their arrival when Sarah returned from the general store with news and gossip. "Those federal men are asking a lot of questions about Jake," Sarah reported. setting down her market basket with unusual force. Seems someone sent them a telegram claiming Jake's been helping the cattle rustlers. Clara felt her blood run cold. Who would make such an accusation? Nobody knows for sure, but the telegram was signed a concerned citizen. Real brave of them, wasn't it? Sarah's sarcasm was thick. I've got half a mind to march over there and give those marshals a piece of my mind about Jake Sullivan's character. No, Sarah, that might make things worse. Jake needs to handle this himself. But as the day wore on, Clara's worry deepened. Through the boarding house windows, she could see townspeople gathering in small groups, whispering and pointing toward the sheriff's office. The federal marshals had been interviewing people all morning, asking about Jake's activities and his relationship with local ranchers. By afternoon, Clara couldn't stand the uncertainty any longer. She walked to the sheriff's office, where she found Jake standing at his window, watching the street with a grim expression. "How bad is it?" she asked without preamble. Jake turned to her, and she was shocked by how tired he looked. "Someone's been very thorough in building a case against me. They've presented evidence that I've been passing information to the rustlers about which ranches to hit and when. What kind of evidence? Forged letters in my handwriting. Testimony from witnesses who claim they saw me meeting with suspicious characters, and most damaging of all, stolen cattle found on a piece of land that's supposedly been purchased in my name." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "But that's impossible. You've been working day and night to catch these rustlers. I know that, and you know that, but the evidence looks convincing. Someone's been planning this for a long time, Clara. They know about my past, and they're using it to make their accusations seem credible. Who would do such a thing? I have my suspicions, but I can't prove anything yet. The marshals want to arrest me, but I've convinced them to give me 24 hours to present evidence of my innocence. If I can't, they'll take me back to the territorial capital for trial." Clara felt panic rising in her chest. "There has to be something we can do. Clara, you need to stay as far away from this as possible. If I'm arrested, anyone associated with me will be under suspicion too." "I don't care about that," Clara said fiercely. "I care about you. I'm not going to stand by while someone destroys your life with lies." Jake crossed to her and took her hands in his. "Clara, I need you to understand something. Even if I clear my name of these rustling charges, my past will always be a shadow over me. You deserve better than that. Don't you dare try to push me away now," Clara said, her eyes blazing. "I love you, Jake Sullivan, and I don't care who knows it. Your past doesn't define who you are today." Jake stared at her in amazement. "You love me?" "With all my heart. And if you think I'm going to let some coward destroy the best man I've ever known, you're seriously mistaken." Before Jake could respond, the office door burst open. Elizabeth Banks stumbled in, her dress torn and her face streaked with tears and dirt. "Sheriff Sullivan, you have to help me." They took Michael. Jake immediately moved to assist her to a chair. "Slow down, Miss Banks. Who took Michael Davidson?" "I don't know." "Two men with masks came to Doc Patterson's office while I was sitting with Michael. They said they had orders to transfer him to another doctor, but when I tried to follow them, they pushed me down and told me to mind my own business." Clara brought Elizabeth a glass of water. "Did you recognize anything about these men? Their voices? The way they moved?" Elizabeth shook her head. "They kept their faces covered and spoke in whispers. But one of them had a distinctive scar on his left hand, shaped like a crescent moon." Jake and Clara exchanged glances. Jake's expression had turned deadly serious. "I know that scar," Jake said quietly. "It belongs to a man named Dutch Carmichael. He used to ride with the gang I was part of years ago. Why would he be here now?" Clara asked. "Because someone hired him to clean up loose ends. Michael Davidson must have seen or heard something that could expose the real rustlers." Elizabeth looked between them in confusion. "I don't understand. What does this have to do with the cattle stealing?" Jake made a decision. "Miss Banks, I'm going to tell you something in confidence. And I need your word that you won't repeat it to anyone until this is all over." Elizabeth nodded solemnly. "The cattle rustling, the shooting of Michael Davidson, and the charges against me are all connected. Someone has been orchestrating everything to achieve a specific goal. and I believe that goal is to discredit me and take control of something valuable in this territory. But what could be valuable enough to justify all this trouble? Elizabeth asked. Clara had been thinking the same thing. Jake, what if this isn't about cattle at all? What if someone knows something about this land that the rest of us don't? Jake's eyes widened as understanding dawned. The railroad survey. There were rumors last year about a possible railroad line coming through this area. If someone knew the exact route, they could buy up the land cheap and then sell it to the railroad company for a fortune. And the cattle rustling was meant to drive down property values and force smaller ranchers to sell, Clara added, the pieces falling into place, while the accusations against me would remove. The one person in a position to investigate and expose the scheme, Jake finished. Elizabeth stood up suddenly. I have to tell you something. My father has been buying up land parcels all around Copper Creek for the past 6 months. He told me it was just good business, but he's been very secretive about it. Your father is the banker. He would have access to information about which ranchers are struggling financially, Clara realized. Jake nodded grimly. And as Thomas Whitmore's future father-in-law, would have had access to information about which ranches were most vulnerable to rustling attacks. Are you saying my father is behind all of this? Elizabeth asked in horror. I'm saying your father has the means, the motive, and the opportunity. But I still need proof. Jake began pacing the small office. The problem is, I'm running out of time. The marshals want to arrest me tomorrow morning, and Dutch Carmichael has Michael Davidson. It's probably to keep him from talking about what he witnessed. Clara felt a surge of determination. Then, we need to find Michael and get him to safety before tomorrow morning. Clara, absolutely not. Dutch Carmichael is dangerous, and if he's working with others, this could turn violent quickly. You can't do this alone, Jake. The marshals are watching your every move. But they're not watching me or Elizabeth. Elizabeth straightened her shoulders. She's right. I can move around town without arousing suspicion. And I know my father's business associates and properties. Jake looked at the two women, seeing the resolve in their faces. He knew they were right. He couldn't solve this alone, not with federal marshals breathing down his neck. If we're going to do this, we need a plan. Elizabeth, can you think of any remote properties your father owns or has access to, where they might be holding Michael? Elizabeth considered this carefully. There's an old mining claim about 5 miles north of town. My father acquired it as collateral on a defaulted loan. It has some buildings that might be suitable for hiding someone. That's a possibility. Anywhere else? The old Hendricks place. It's been abandoned for 2 years since the family moved east. My father has been trying to sell it, so he has the keys. Jake nodded. We'll check both locations, but we need to be smart about this. If we're caught, it will only confirm the accusations against me. Clara moved to the gun cabinet and began checking weapons. Then we make sure we're not caught. As evening approached, the three of them finalized their plan. Elizabeth would create a distraction by visiting the marshal's office to ask about the investigation, keeping them occupied while Jake and Clara searched the mining claim. If Michael wasn't there, they would regroup and try the Hendricks property. There's one more thing, Jake said as they prepared to leave. If something goes wrong and I'm captured or killed, I need you both to get word to the territorial governor about what we've discovered. Don't let them bury the truth with me. Clara grabbed his arm. Nothing is going to happen to you. We're going to find Michael, expose the real criminals, and clear your name. And if we don't? Clara looked him straight in the eye. Then we'll face whatever comes together. I told you I love you, Jake Sullivan, and I meant it. For better or worse, Jake pulled her into his arms and kissed her fiercely. I love you too, Clara Martinez. More than I ever thought possible. As they separated, Elizabeth smiled despite the danger they were facing. If we all survive this, there's going to be at least one wedding in Copper Creek that's based on true love instead of business arrangements. The sun was setting as they put their plan into motion, each of them knowing that by morning, everything would be different. Either they would have exposed the conspiracy and saved Michael Davidson, or they would all be fugitives running for their lives. The old mining claim sat in a hollow between two hills, its weathered buildings barely visible in the moonlight. Jake and Clara approached on foot, having left their horses a quarter-mile back to avoid detection. The silence was broken only by the sound of wind through abandoned mining equipment and the distant howl of a coyote. "There's a light in the main building," Clara whispered, pointing to a faint glow emanating from what appeared to be the old assay office. Jake nodded, checking his revolver one more time. "Stay behind me, and if shooting starts, get to cover immediately." They crept closer to the building, using the shadows cast by rusted mining machinery for concealment. Through a dirty window, they could see two figures inside. One was clearly Michael Davidson, tied to a chair, but conscious. The other was a large man with his back to the window. The crescent-shaped scar on his left hand was clearly visible. "Dutch Carmichael," Jake confirmed in a whisper. "I don't see anyone else, but that doesn't mean they're not there," as they watched. Another figure entered the building from a back room. Clara gasped softly as she recognized Thomas Whitmore. His usually immaculate appearance disheveled, and his face bearing the look of a man under extreme stress. "You said you only needed him quiet for a few hours." Thomas was saying to Dutch, "It's been 2 days. And now, the whole town is looking for him. Plans change." "Boy," Dutch replied in a gravelly voice, "your girlfriend's daddy decided the teacher knows too much to ever be let go. He's not my girlfriend's daddy anymore," Thomas snapped. "Elizabeth broke off our engagement this morning. She chose this fool over me and her family's fortune." Jake and Clara exchanged glances. Elizabeth had successfully created her distraction, and apparently had found the courage to follow her heart in the process. "That makes things simpler then," Dutch said with a cruel smile. "No more need to pretend this was about protecting young love. Banks can have his railroad scheme, and we can dispose of the witnesses." "Witnesses? What witnesses?" "The teacher here, for one, and that interfering sheriff who's been getting too close to the truth." Thomas paled. "You're talking about murder? That wasn't part of the agreement. It is now. Banks is paying us enough to buy our silence permanently. You can either be part of the solution or part of the problem." Clara felt. Jake tensed beside her as Dutch's hand moved toward his gun. She knew they were running out of time. "I'm going around back," Jake whispered. "When you hear me make my move, create a distraction out front. Yell, throw something at the window, anything to draw their attention, Jake. It's too dangerous, trust me." He squeezed her hand briefly, then disappeared into the shadows. Clara counted to 60, then picked up a chunk of ore and hurled it at the front window. The glass shattered with a loud crash, and she heard Dutch curse loudly. "Check outside," Dutch barked. "It might be the sheriff." As Thomas moved toward the broken window, Jake burst through the back door with his gun drawn. "Drop your weapons." Dutch spun around, faster than his bulk suggested he could move, his gun clearing leather with practiced ease. The two men fired simultaneously, the sound echoing off the walls of the small building. Clara watched in horror as Jake staggered but remained standing, while Dutch Carmichael crumpled to the floor, clutching his chest. "Jake." Clara ran into the building, not caring about the danger. "I'm all right," Jake said, though she could see blood seeping through his shirt. "The bullet just grazed me." Thomas stood frozen by the window, his own gun still holstered. "I didn't sign up for this," he said weakly. "I just wanted to make sure Elizabeth couldn't run away with him. So you were willing to see an innocent man killed to keep your bride?" Clara asked in disgust as she worked to untie Michael Davidson. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. Banks said we'd just scare Davidson off, make him leave town. Then when the sheriff started getting close to discovering our cattle operations, Banks said we needed to discredit him too." Michael Davidson, though weak from his ordeal, managed to speak. "I saw them," he said hoarsely. "The night of the Wilson raid. I was riding back from visiting a student's family when I saw Banks and 3 other men driving cattle toward the river. One of them was Carmichael here." Jake nodded grimly. "That's why they had to silence you. Your testimony would have exposed the whole conspiracy." "What conspiracy?" Thomas asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "The railroad," Clara explained. Your future father-in-law has been using cattle rustling to drive down property values so he could buy land cheap. When the railroad comes through, he'll sell that same land for 10 times what he paid for it. Thomas stared at her in shock. Railroad? What railroad? The one Banks has been secretly negotiating with for months. He's been playing you just like he's been playing everyone else in this town. The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Through the broken window, they could see torches and lanterns moving toward the mining camp. The marshals, Jake said. Elizabeth must have brought them. Minutes later, Marshal Hayes and his men surrounded the building. Elizabeth rushed in ahead of them, running straight to Michael's side. "Thank God you're safe," she whispered, helping him to his feet. "Miss Banks told us about her father's involvement." Marshal Hayes said to Jake, "We found correspondence in his office detailing the railroad negotiations and a ledger showing payments to Dutch Carmichael and his associates." "What? About the evidence against me?" "All fabricated. Banks had quite an operation going, forged documents, bribed witnesses, even planted that stolen cattle on land he claimed you'd purchased. He was very thorough in trying to frame you." Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. And Banks, in custody, along with 2 of his associates. The third man, unfortunately, escaped during the arrest. As the marshals took Thomas into custody as a witness rather than a conspirator, Jake finally allowed Clara to examine his wound properly. The bullet had indeed only grazed his shoulder, but it needed cleaning and bandaging. "You scared me to death," Clara said as she worked. "I thought I was going to lose you before I ever got the chance to tell you how much you mean to me. You're not getting rid of me that easily," Jake replied, wincing as she tightened the bandage. "I have too much to live for now." Elizabeth and Michael had moved outside, where she was explaining to her father's former associates that the engagement was permanently ended. Despite the scandal that would inevitably follow, she looked happier than Clara had ever seen her. "What will you do now?" Clara asked Elizabeth when she returned. "Michael and I are leaving Copper Creek," Elizabeth replied. "We'll find somewhere we can start fresh, away from all this ugliness." "What about you and Jake?" Clara looked at the man she loved, seeing past the exhaustion and pain to the fundamental goodness that had drawn her to him from the beginning. "I think we'll stay. This town has been good to us, and now that the truth is out, maybe we can help it heal." Jake reached for her hand. "Clara Martinez, will you marry me? I can't promise you an easy life, but I can promise you an honest one." Clara smiled through her tears. "Yes, Jake Sullivan. I'll marry you." As the sun rose over Copper Creek the next morning, the town was buzzing with news of the night's events. The cattle rustling ring had been broken, the real criminals were in custody, and the railroad development would proceed honestly, benefiting the entire community rather than just one greedy man. 3 months later, Copper Creek celebrated 2 weddings on the same day. Elizabeth Banks married Michael Davidson in a simple ceremony before they left for California, where Michael had been offered a position at a school for the children of former slaves. Clara Martinez married Jake Sullivan in the church where she had first found Elizabeth crying on the steps, surrounded by the friends they had made in their adopted home. Sarah Jenkins served as Clara's matron of honor, declaring that she had known from the beginning that those 2 were meant for each other. The whole town turned out for the celebration, a testament to how much both Jake and Clara had come to mean to the community as they danced their first dance as husband and wife. Jake whispered in Clara's ear, "Do you ever regret that Thomas Whitmore left you at the depot?" Clara looked into the eyes of the man she loved, thinking of all the twists of fate that had brought them together. "Never," she said firmly. "The world moved on from what I thought I wanted and led me to what I actually needed. And what's that? You, Jake Sullivan. Always you." The music played on into the night. Ah. And as the stars appeared overhead, Jake and Clara knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning.